Okay, everyone, we're going to launch straight into it because we've got a very packed hour ahead of us, and we want to make sure that we make the most of it and get through all of the content that we've got available. I'm going to set my timer to make sure that we stay on time, and we're going to go. Right, so good enough to eat. Thank you, everyone, for coming to this session today. We are really excited to talk about the research and also to give you some great advice on what you can do within financial services, bearing in mind EEAT and Consumer Duty. And also, we're very lucky to have Sophia with us. So, agenda, intros, that's what we're doing right now. Then we're going to go on to what is EEAT, because not everyone's going to be familiar with that. How do the goals of Google and the FCA line up? The problem in financial services that we've identified when we did our research. Then we'll take into some EAT guidelines and best practice, as long as some examples of sites out there that are doing it well. Then also how to improve your own scores. We'll then move over to Sophia from Google, who will be talking about financial services market trends. And then we'll have 10 minutes at the end, as long as all timing works out, to do Q&A. We actually have got a bit more time. We can run over a bit if you've got lots of questions. So don't panic too much about that if we're eating into that time. Okay, so who are Balance? We are the UK's only performance marketing agency consultancy dedicated to financial services brands. And the team that is working for Balance has works on SEO, PPC, content, social, digital PR training, lots of other things. And we work for the brands that you can see on your screen right there. But we're not here for a sales pitch, we're here to share some information. So we're going to move on straight away to who your speakers are today and why maybe you should listen to us. Okay, I'm Alex Murphy, I'm the co-founder of Balance. I have 20 years, so a good half of my life now, depressingly, in marketing. Most of it has been within digital, and for the last decade, it's been in financial services. Or more actually, working for brands such as the Royal Mint, Go Compare, and then for the last 5 years, I was the marketing director at Admiral. Very lucky to have Phil here. See him waving. Phil is head of creative at Balance and within the Liberty Group. He's got 12 years experience in content marketing experience, and he's going to be our EAT expert today. He's a joy to watch Phil doing presentations, so I'm looking forward to that. Previous content consultancy and training projects include Confused.com, Aviva, and Profile Pensions. And then we have Sophia. Sophia is Senior Financial Services Lead at Google with 10 years plus in digital marketing experience. I've had the pleasure myself of working with Sophia in the past, and she's worked in some fantastic brands across digital marketing with Apple Money and Confused.com. Okay, there we go.
Amazing. Thank you, Alex.
I'll hand over to you, sir.
Fantastic. So what is EAT? Why does it matter? Well, basically, the start of this story begins in the halcyon days of 2018. And Google basically had a trust problem. Google was finding that a lot of searches that people were making, important searches around their health, their wealth, really important things, essentially the most trustworthy bits of content weren't coming up. The most trustworthy authors weren't coming up. And as a result, people were kind of getting a little bit less trust in Google as a service provider as well. So it launched a kind of new algorithm update, a new way of doing things in terms of ranking content, and it's like, okay, right, going forward, we're going to prioritize websites and content that convey expertise, authority, and trust. They all did this in these search quality evaluator guidelines, a big document essentially the size of the BFG, but a little bit less enjoyable. And this affected the financial services industry hugely. It was also known as Your Money or Your Life. Affected finance brands a lot. They're big brands ranking for really big terms, making lots of money. Slipped down the rankings almost overnight in some cases because they weren't conveying expertise, authority, and trust in their content. And then a few years later, Google updated EAT to add another E to things. So talking about experience. So this time it wanted people with real lived experience of the content topic they're writing about to be contributing content. That's an equally important thing to Google. But at the center of everything, at the kind of the forefront of everything should be trust underpinning everything. And these days, from Google's perspective, if you've got web pages, if your website isn't conveying EAT, that expertise, experience, authority, and trust, you're not going to rank well for the big search terms. You've got to have content that's really trustworthy. And in financial services, where this is more important than ever because you're concerning people's wealth, really, really important things. Yeah, this is absolutely essential. If you're not doing this, you're not going to rank well. You're not going to be able to meet those big business goals.
Okay, so far so Google. And then we move it almost feels like whiplash when we go, and now the FCA. But I suppose that's the world that we all sit in here, in these two behemoths. And so the FCA's mission, and you will all hear these magical words, consumer duty, many, many times, I'm sure, over the last few months or year. The FCA has the same mission with consumer duty. So what it's trying to do is make, it's conscious more and more the world is becoming digital. A lot more financial decisions are in the hands of the consumers themselves, maybe rather than going through brokers or specialists that can guide them. So it's increasingly fast and complex, as they say, and they want to do enhance trust and engender trust within the experience for someone when they're going online. So what this meant, of course, is consumer duty. And specifically here, when we're talking about communications and the communications where we as marketers are involved, we've got the two, there's obviously 4 principles, but 2 of them are consumer understanding and consumer support. We read quite a lot of the training material around this. Obviously knew about consumer duty from my previous roles, but really got deep into this. You know, where are the relevancies here? And what we noticed was that big overlap, and it was about, are communications accessible? You know, is it possible for the right stuff to be put in front of people as opposed to maybe thin, low quality content that can't really be trusted? And so this is exactly the same thing that Google was trying to achieve. So therefore, Google and the FCA agree. Online communications need to be clear, accessible, and put consumers first and engender trust. Sounds fantastic, right? Yeah, that's great. So when we were forming Balance and speaking to a lot of marketing directors, you're going, okay, well, this is obviously the biggest thing going on at the moment across all the financial services that we serve. And then we thought, well, let's have a look at how everyone's doing. You know, let's sit down and go through how everyone's doing. And we spotted quite a big problem. So we looked at 50 of the biggest brands. You know, there's not a brand now on this list that I don't think you'd recognize across all sorts of categories. So banking and building societies, insurers, price comparison websites, investment firms, and consultancy firms. People like we don't go a lot into the names that are on this list, but people like PricewaterhouseCoopers, you might think of them as consultancies, but also they're accountancy firms as well, so they fit within this. And we looked at them all and how they all performed across the 4 criteria of EAT, but also accessibility, because that's a core part of this consumer duty and also part of the experience online. We rated them all against a score of 3, from 0, terrible, no presence of expertise whatsoever or no way of demonstrating trust at all, over to a 3 where they're looking pretty good. What we found was, as we say here, quite eye-opening, which is, you know, I'm quite glad, if I'm honest, because if we'd done it all and everyone was perfect, it would have been quite a boring piece of research. Okay, so our sector-wide audit. This is just a snapshot. We looked across these categories, and then we looked across these criteria in order to measure it. As you can see straight away, it's not a nice, neat little line here. There's a lot of variance across different categories. And even within the categories, although these are averaged up for simplicity of reading the data, even within a category, you'll have quite a lot of variance. So you can see building societies maybe scoring low on quite some things, but a couple of building societies were doing really well at it. Price comparison, again, though there were some standouts, there were some that were really struggling in certain areas. So it's not even as clean cut as this, but this is a general category comparison. So some headline results of what we saw. Trust. It's a word that's used so often. It's a word that we all say about that, and the last thing you want to say is trust me, because you never trust a person who says trust me. But what we found of the trust signals that Phil will explain in more detail later on, only 8 websites scored a maximum. 8 out of 50, which means 84% of websites that we looked at had a big gap in ticking all the boxes that should engender both Google to say, well, this is a trustworthy website, but also consumers when they're looking. And this is the whole point, right? That they're supposed to feel confident in their financial decisions. So yeah, trust was pretty weak. Building societies and banks scored the lowest. And again, this is what we're talking about here is how well they convey trust, not the actual level of trust, but how well they convey trust on their websites. Lacking experience. Now, obviously, building societies, banks, insurers aren't lacking experience, but they are lacking the capability of conveying that experience. You can see this is a very different shaped chart again. Building societies, of the ones we looked at, and we looked at half a dozen building societies, none of them were ticking the boxes for conveying the experience of their authors. And insurance, insurance is full, speaking from personal experience here, insurance buildings are full of experts in this thing, but they don't necessarily communicate it very well in their content. Quite accessible. Now, accessibility is a funny one because it looks like it's not too bad, and we used a number of tools to measure the accessibility. And what we found was we measured it linearly, I think. Not a mathematician, but we took all the scores, then we split them into quadrants. So though there were a lot of people who scored a 3, they still had quite a lot of errors on them, but there were some real standouts as some really poor accessibility in some really big brands, shockingly so, actually. And that is a big concern given consumer duties impending, and that's this reference specifically in there. So once we had some of this data, we started comparing categories, going, well, okay, that's all well and good, but what does it really mean? What does that tell anyone, apart from, we're not here to slap wrists here, we're here to call out poor performance. We're here to identify opportunities for people, for consumers, and also make things better for consumers. That's what the ultimate objective is for everyone, right? So let's look at 2 categories here, 2 that are close to my heart, hence I've put them first, but price comparison and insurance. Now, I was in price comparison first, and then I moved to insurer. And there's always a feeling in insurers where you go, oh, we can never fight on SEO against the price comparison because they've got an army of content writers. They've got all this money and they've got all this. And what can we really do? But actually, and yes, there are a lot of SEO factors outside of EAT that impact their position. But there are some things here that are certainly achievable. Right. So when we measured insurers, the insurers on our list, and there were, 12, 13 major insurers on there, and then the big 4 PCWs, we found that actually the insurers are really quite a bit weaker at showing content authority. They were not very good at showing off their brilliant expertise that they have in-house with the content. It's generally written by some very talented writers, but without necessarily using the in-house expertise. And that's hard, just going up to head of motor and going, can you write this article for us? Because they're not writers, right? But we need to be using their knowledge a lot more. But even price comparison, it's not perfect. Though they did well of all categories, they probably did the best. They weren't fantastic at accessibility on average. They didn't necessarily within their articles show very rich content. Expertise was often lacking. So yeah. The status quo that we assume is always going to be the case due to size of the amount of money and profit that certain things make. It doesn't need to be so. It can be addressed. Another 2 obvious comparisons here, banks and building societies. Okay, so banks often outrank building societies for most terms. And there's a lot of factors involved there. But what we found when we looked at the chart is actually banks don't do great a lot of EAT, but they do a lot better than building societies did. Apart from one area, which is authority. So actually, building societies work better at authority. And that, I think, is because building societies have maybe a more focused thing on mortgages, etc. So it does give them that edge. So if someone goes to the website going, I want to find out about a mortgage, these guys know about mortgages, right? So they did do, and they'll probably find that they outrank slightly better on some of those terms than banks, with other factors considered. But yeah, what building societies did lack completely was any demonstration of the experience of their authors. But yeah, both were very weak on trust signals, and these are the guys who hold our money, right? So yeah. Horses for courses. These next 2 comparisons are a little bit more random, but they're just to demonstrate the effect of EAT. So the 2 winning categories, the 2 strongest categories of financial services were price comparison and consultancies. And what we found is they were strong in different ways. So content authorities, we talked about in price comparison, really good, huge wealth of content around specific topics, brilliant. However, you'd find consultancies which trade on having experts there. Yeah, that's their whole thing. We've got a big bunch of experts. This is what we do. So not surprisingly, every article you see on consultancy websites and accountancy websites are, this is the world condition by the head of whatever for EMEA. These are massive authorities in their space. So if you wanted to read about this stuff or those areas, those are the guys that you would trust. So they do that really, really well. Neither of them were amazing at accessibility. And then this final one seems like a really weird comparison, but we took, I looked at it just the shape was interesting. And what we found is, why is it there's a similar shape, even though insurers weren't doing it as well? Why is there a similar shape between investment firms, wealth management firms, and insurance firms? And I found there is probably because they're both in some level around protecting assets. Right? They're both there to protect financial assets or physical assets and property, etc. And so is it maybe something to learn from both of them? Is it they could be looking at each other? Because you don't necessarily look at investment firms when you start in insurance, see how they go about things. Maybe there's some parallels here that could look at each other and go, well, okay, we could be better at this. So we just behaved a little bit more like them in how they approach looking after assets, for example. From that, I'll move over to Phil, who's going to talk through some guidelines and best practice. Read.
Amazing. Thank you, Alex. Yeah, so this is all about, okay, EAT's important. How can we make sure that we're kind of rolling this out in our content on our websites? And it all kind of starts with experience, really. Experience is all about showing readers that the people who are writing your content have been there, have done that. They know exactly all there is to know about this topic. So very simply, that's having author bios on your content. So people can say, okay, yeah, this is a person who's really respected within this niche. It's having unique content. It's giving that personal evidence of experience, giving your own kind of personal recommendations and opinions that you've kind of built up from years or decades of experience. All of that shows to Google that, yeah, this is a top quality bit of content that people are going to read, that people are going to trust. Really nice example here from KPMG, their Global Economic Outlook piece, authored by their chief economist. You don't get much more experience from that. And yeah, kind of consciously or subconsciously, search engines and users are going to see that and say, yeah, okay, this is someone who's really experienced. They know exactly what they're talking about. From an expertise perspective, if experience is all about how clued up the author is, expertise is all about how good the unique individual bits of content are. So having really detailed, really thorough content that shows that you've really done your homework when researching this piece, referencing external research, linking to that in your content, but also creating your own research around this. If you know this topic better than anyone else, then you will probably have in-house data and research and expertise that you can use as part of that no one else is going to have. Standard Life do this really well. This example here, really nice in-depth piece that gets to the bottom of the topic in question. You can see it's kind of written in first person as well, which is nice from an experience perspective too. But yeah, you can see they've got the references down the bottom of all the bits of research that they've done in writing this piece. Just shows to users, yeah, we've put a lot of work in to create this. They've even created, as you can see in the kind of on the right-hand side, an Earth Day hub, which kind of expands more on the story. That's their kind of unique data too. Then when it comes to authority is all about the content strategy. So the various bits of content and work that you're doing to convey authority in your niche. So again, that's kind of using prominent authors who are respected in their industry, using schema, so kind of technical elements to tell Google that these authors are really authoritative, and having a variety of different bits of content around your vertical, really showing to Google, yeah, we know this topic, we know this topic, we know this topic, and that combination of all just shows that big authority within your industry as a whole. And then from an off-site perspective as well, ensuring that you've got the links from the external websites that are really kind of trusted and relevant in your niche to your blog content. That shows to Google that you're a really authoritative player in your market. Lovely example here from Admiral, obviously a really nice authoritative author on their motoring content. They'll be kind of pushed on his social channels as well, which is a great kind of authoritative trust signal. And then also a load of related articles around their area that just shows to users we know what we're talking about when it comes to cars, when it comes to MOTs, when it comes to electric vehicles. And then trust. Trust underpins everything. And trust is really all about the whole website strategy, really. So making sure there's loads of different things on there that conveys that trustworthiness, whether it's case studies and testimonials, user reviews, clear customer service information, showing your real staff, obviously a huge kind of trust signal, subconscious or otherwise, to people. But also very importantly, ensuring that the user journeys that people are embarking on your site are really satisfying and giving them exactly what they want. So I think one key thing that I'd really recommend from this is kind of auditing your kind of most popular pages, where people are coming into your site. Are you giving them a good user experience? Are you finding them? Are you giving them what they need to know to go there? If you are, then great. If you're not sure, then yeah, potentially there's a bit of work to be done there. Really nice example, Skipton Building Society. Just convey their trust really well across the site. Loads of nice user reviews, show their award wins, these sorts of things, all conveys that trust in the brand and on the website directly as well. So yeah, so this is it. If there's one slide, I might be a little bit biased, but if there's one slide on this that you should screenshot today, I think it's this lovely pyramid. It's the kind of how these four things kind of line up together. Experience is all about the author, expertise all about the specific content, authority is your content strategy and how you convey authority, and the trust is all about how across the site you're showing to people you're a really trustworthy brand that they can do business with safely.
Okay, gosh, we're ahead of time.
Wow.
Every time we practice this, we'd have about a minute left at this point. Obviously, I rushed some aspect of it.
What a world.
There's too much to cover. There's so much to cover on this. So obviously, there's a lot more to our research that we've covered than we've covered today, but there's only so much you can fit in, although we could have fit it in a little bit more, it turns out, so another for next time. Right, so in summary, in terms of content, Google and the FCA want the same things. They want to be clear, accessible, and trustworthy. The very few brands, though, in financial services, and then we looked at the top 50. We actually looked at a lot more than 50. I did 50, and then I realized there wasn't enough of a nice balance between, no pun intended, between different sectors. So I actually broadened out building societies, for example, and our wealth management. We looked at a large number of those. So we looked at maybe 60 to 70 brands, and none of them were doing brilliantly at this. So to succeed online, one big call out and one thing that kept coming up was you need to use your experts in-house. You need to use your financial experts because it's going to become more a case that people want to read from those guys. They want to be able to trust those guys. We all know, I mean, you can't go to a presentation these days without AI coming up. So here it is, tick your AI bingo card. AI is going to produce a lot of rubbish content. It's going to produce a lot of thin content, and people are going to learn very quickly to be quite discerning, just as Google will be. So the importance of leaning on your quality authors, and don't get me wrong, the big people who aren't necessarily head of product, they're still really, really important writers, but they need to be leaning very much on the expertise in-house and referencing the expertise in-house. This rich quality content, which is good for all us as good writers and good marketers, is more important than ever. And of course, a lot of these things, these principles, because they are principles, they weren't algorithmic changes, they were principles. They might have been nice to do, should do's before. Now they are a must do, because not only do they affect your rankings, which is always incredibly important financially, but they also affect potentially how your website is perceived as a whole. And we know how important this is in the light of consumer duty. So this is no longer a should do, this has become a must do. Now, we didn't show the data today because you've got a lot of different brands in there. We didn't want to just have some big list of brands, or they did bad. But if you want to know how your brand performed, you want to know, if we haven't covered it, if you'd like to know how your brand would perform in this, by all means, just get in touch with us. And my email is alex@thebalanceagency. You will have got an email from me this morning, actually. If you want to get in touch to find out how you did and what you could do, by all means, go ahead.